This episode of the Mead House is brought to you by Amaretti, the ultimate manufacturer of brewers' natural infusions, craft purees, and concentrates to bring your next batch to the next level. Click on the link in the episode description below to see their full lineup of flavors. Use promo code MEADHOUSE at checkout to save 15% off your next order.
Well, Aaron finally made it.
Nice of me to join.
Well, we thought maybe there for a minute that Michigan just kind of fell off the planet, but apparently not. You're back.
Yeah. My Wi-Fi here just went a little bit wonky there for a second, but got it rebooted here just in the nick of time.
There you go. Hey, that works. Hey, welcome to the Mead House here on a Tuesday night, and if you're making mead at home and you don't want to make some pretty good stuff, having issues with it, this is a pretty good show to listen to. Now we're not experts at making mead, but by golly, we can sure work through some issues with you and help you discover or overcome. Many of us have already been there and done that, but the Mead House, we're all about making good mead at home. We have a Facebook page. We don't do the Twitter, and the meadhouse.com is where we live. So you can get to our Facebook right there off the website. The show is always recorded and put up the following day in a podcast form. Feel free to download it, log into your iTunes account, and you can get it that way too. You can even take the show with you live if you download either the Android or iOS app, depending on the phone you got, right off the front page of our website there. First of all, Aaron Martin in the house out of Michigan. Mississippi, Chris Spencer. Along with us tonight, Jeff Schaus in Kansas. And, of course, I'm J.D. Webb. We kind of make up the Mead House here. Some shout-outs, guys, I want to get out of the way before we go too much further. I want to throw one out to an Angie Colwell. Says she loves listening, and I don't recall what Facebook page I got this off of, but it's one of those mead group things that I think we all belong to. Says she loves listening to us guys on our road trips. Good luck with the coffee experiment. Husband got a Mazer Cup Silver in 2014 for his Grumpy Monkey coffee, and he is very interested in how yours comes out. So, Angie, thanks a million for listening to the show, and stay tuned because we will definitely let you know how. Another shout out to Christopher Bishop II. And this is one that I thought, guys, we might be able to help him out here a little bit. He asked this question a couple of months back and really hasn't got around to looking at his answers. But a lot of people have replied back to him. But he's asking, his mead has a rubbing alcohol taste, and he doesn't know how to fix it. And this is a batch that he started back on February 21st. He's racked it every month. He says he's never done a secondary ferment. I'm not quite sure what he means by that, but he wants to know what recommendations people have, and I've read the replies. Many of them are, they're talking temperatures, they're talking nutrients, and that kind of thing. But here again, it's kind of difficult to answer because we don't know exactly what he put into it. So, but I thought we might give it a shot. What do you think? What do you think that rubbing alcohol taste is coming from?
Oh, me. A lot of things can cause it. If you're looking for a solution for this particular batch, he made it in February, you said?
Yeah.
I would say wait till February of 2017 and try it again.
Yeah. That's, we were talking about this the other day. Time does do mead some good, especially when you are having some issues with it. Jeff, what's your thoughts on that? Go ahead.
Yeah, that just points to the fusel alcohol problems to me, and that's stressed out yeast right there. So it was probably either fermented a little too hot or just not enough nutrients in there. And like you guys have already said, I mean, the best way you can save this batch is probably to just be patient with it, let it age out, and hope for the best. I mean, there's really not a lot you can do with all those heavier alcohols.
Yeah. Yeah, and Aaron, my only experience with something like that was directly relevant to temperature control. What do you think?
That definitely is one of the factors I would point to. I'll tell you from my experiences, I can point to a number of batches that I made that definitely had kind of a rubbing alcohol or Robitussin type of a flavor to them. And for me, one of the biggest things that I've done to steer away from that is following the Tasna method with the organic fermade O. And at the same time, when I first started doing that was the first time that I started doing the degassing twice a day for the first 7 days. And I think that makes a big difference to keep the yeast happy. But, as Chris and Jeff have talked about as well, I think the temperature is a big thing, definitely a factor to monitor, as is the pH levels as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and the replies that people have come back with on that, for the life of me, I can't remember what mead. I forgot to write down the mead group that this came out of, but most of the replies that he's getting back kind of run the gamut from, not enough yeast nutrients to temperature control to, various things. So, but Christopher, I hope we at least a little bit, with what we were able to come up with. I don't think you're in that much trouble. Just put it away, put it in a closet, keep an airlock on it, and, keep it in a cool place, and just let it sit, let it hang out. And
he's lucky if his only problem is hot alcohol. That is one problem that will usually fix itself with time.
Yeah. Yeah, so just let it hang out and, take a sip every now and again, every couple of months or so, and see how she's doing, and just keep an eye on it. Another shout out to Randall Scott Dolan. A valuable lesson was learned this past weekend, he says. My Terramind, I'm saying that right, Terramind Sizer had not farted a single bubble in months, reached a 9.6 with Lalvin, 9.6%. Seems kind of low with D47, but so he blended it with mango. You guys know exactly what's going to happen next, right? He blends it with a organic mango passion fruit juice upon bottling, and then 2 weeks later, he had bottle bombs out the yin-yang.
I was afraid that's where that was going. Oh, no.
Yeah. And then he goes on to say, will definitely sulfite all the subsequent batches thereafter. But, that's... I read about that in my early days when I first started making mead, and I've been very careful. I think I had one bottle that the cork actually blew out of, and luckily the bottle was standing upright when that happened. So, and it didn't really create a big mess, but I don't know. I mean, that's, when you leave it set for so long and you think it's dead, how careful do we need to be here, How long is long enough? Maybe that's the question.
Well, there is no time. If you have residual sugar, you've always got the potential for renewed fermentation. And that's why I don't try to avoid chemicals. Sulfites and sorbates, if you have residual sugar in any of your mead, it needs to have sulfites and sorbates added before you bottle, unless you're severely allergic to them or something.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's jumping out at me here too is you mentioned that he was only at 9.6% alcohol for the D47 yeast, what is the tolerance on that? Between like 12 and 14%. So, I agree with Chris. I think if there's residual sweetness, it's just something that you're probably better safe than sorry adding in some sorbate and metabisulfite. But at the same time, if you're way over the tolerance level in terms of the ABV there for that yeast, you're probably a little bit safer too without adding that. But it's probably not a bad idea.
Yeah, and that was the first thing that jumped out at me was the 9.6 with the D47, and I know D47 is good up to at least 14%.
Oh yeah.
So it was it wasn't all that surprising when I read the next sentence. He blended it with some mango passion fruit juice. I don't know how much sugar is in a mango passion fruit juice, but apparently just enough, and he had to have had some, if not a lot, of residual sugar. I don't know what would have happened to have caused it to just stop unless it was temperature or something like that. That just seems awful low to me.
Yeah, and something that Aaron said, he said if you're way over your tolerance, you're probably okay. And I agree with that to a certain extent, but I've had 71B, which is a 14%, go to 19% of all things.
Oh, wow.
In a gin. You would think, if you've ever made ginger mead, you know that ginger has sort of a stunning effect on yeast. Usually it's gonna putter out before it gets too far ahead. This was a ginger mead that was loaded up with ginger, 71B, and something went wild. Somebody got their superhero costume on, and the thing went to 19%. So.
Yeah. Wow.
I saw this post earlier, and it reminded me of something because had you asked me a week ago, I would have told you, after a few months, you're probably okay from bottle bobs. You really don't have anything to worry about. But Sunday morning, we woke up. My wife went into the kitchen and nearly freaked out because we were saving 2 bottles of the second batch I ever made. It was kind of a semi-sweet mead, and we were saving it because it was essentially my keep busy project for the weekend that my son was due. So I was in the kitchen making mead, and basically like, okay, is it happening? Is it happening? No. Okay, well I can stir this. And our intention was to age it for 21 years until our son is of legal drinking age and share the bottle with him.
Yeah.
This 3-year-old bottle of mead just decided to pop a cork, and I swear there was a puddle of mead all the way across my kitchen floor.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I would have thought a 3-year-old bottle of mead would have been shelf stable, but apparently not. So, no, There is no time limit.
Wow, 3 years. Wow, there you go. So, Randall, if you're listening to the show, there you go. It does happen, and it happens to the best of us, 3 years into it. What's that, Chris?
I say, welcome to the club.
Yeah. You do this long enough and you start reading different articles, you're talking to different people, and I think that's one of the benefits of the show here. Like I said at the top, none of us are experts, but, we've been around for a little while, me probably less than anybody else, and but I've talked to enough people and, have taken enough notes, and I read enough forums and whatnot that deal with this mead making. And there's certain things you pick up on. This bottle bomb thing is one thing I learned very early. You know, don't put a cork on a bottle where you left some, residual sugar in without doing something to stop the fermentation, like sorbating, because down the road it's probably going to happen. And here we find Jeff 3 years later. Who would have known? Yeah. But with that, thanks, guys, for chipping on Christopher and Randall's deals there on the Facebook. We love these Mead Group Facebook pages. I go there all the time and look through them and, put up my likes and whatnot, different things that I see there. But it's a lot of fun. You meet a lot of people, make a lot of friends that way, too. But what are we drinking here tonight? I'll start off. I'm drinking wine tonight. I've been in a wine mood the last few weeks or so, and of course, my wife and I have been collecting wines here in the last several months. And tonight, I'm drinking a Stevens Black Tongue 2012 Yakima Valley Syrah. It's a real dark kind of wine, rich in flavor. I'm not sure if I like a Syrah or not, which would be kind of strange because I love Merlots and Cabs, but what the heck. But it's wet. It tastes fairly good. Maybe it's this particular brand. I don't know, but that's what's in my glass tonight. Aaron, what's in your cup tonight, bud?
Sounds like a nice glass you got going there, JD. So tonight I've got my second bottle from this Misbehavin' Meads, the new meadery that just opened in Valparaiso, Indiana. And this one, I've just got the last swallow of this bottle I opened up over the weekend. It's a buckwheat honey traditional mead. It's the first buckwheat mead that I've ever tried, and I have to tell you, I was a little bit skeptical. You hear about buckwheat meads, and you hear these horror stories about barnyard smells and barnyard flavors, and I got to tell you what this reminds me of. So when I was a little kid, every year at Christmas, my mom would, ask my sister and I what kind of Christmas cookies we would want, and every year I would ask for molasses cookies for Christmas. And this is like those molasses cookies in a glass. Like there's a nice residual sweetness going on, just a real depth and complex flavor. And I just have to say, for anyone that's heard some of those horror stories about buckwheat honey mead, I will say this: it is a very strong flavor and may not be for everyone. But if you like the flavor of molasses, don't be afraid from the buckwheat honey.
Oh yeah, your grandmother probably knew my grandmother. I love molasses cookies.
Yeah.
There's now, and I get confused because I haven't tasted either one, but there are two types of buckwheat, and I can't ever remember the one. There's an East Coast and a Midwestern, I guess, buckwheat, and I can't ever remember which one is the one that tastes like the barnyard. Chris, would you know that?
No, I can't remember either. I think it's the West Coast that's supposed to be better than the East Coast, but I may be totally wrong on that. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it. I know that I've heard people talking about two different kinds of buckwheat out there, and only one of them is really worth making a mead out of. But gosh, molasses cookies, Aaron, I'd love those. Aaron or Jeff, what's in your glass tonight?
Well, in honor of our coffee experiment, I decided to pick up a can of the Santa Fe Brewing Imperial Java Stout. It's brewed with. It looks like they aged it on coffee beans. It has a really nice coffee flavor to it. It's got a little bit of a bitterness to it, and I think that's the Imperial coming through. But it's a pretty nice drink.
Wow, cool. That sounds good. My wife is she's a coffee stout lover when it comes to beer. Chris, coffee tonight? What are you drinking, bud?
No, I don't want anyone to think I'm a snob because I'm drinking a world-class wine. This is one of the best wines that you'll ever get anywhere, and it's sort of a rare find, actually. It's Carlo Rossi in a 1-gallon jug, sweet table wine. You are now permitted to cringe.
Well, yeah.
I'm just laughing. I'm thinking of my dad. God bless him. You know, he likes red wine, and we'll try to bring him, you know, a nice bottle and treat him to something nice. And half the time, he just as soon would have, you know, the $2 or $3 bottle from Walmart.
Well,
yeah.
You know, funny you should say, because I actually have found a couple of the $2 chucks out there that I kind of enjoy. And
there was a reason behind the madness. I'm not really a wine drinker, and my wife wanted some wine. So I'm in the wine store, and I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, I can get this bottle of wine for $12 and chunk the bottle, or I can get this for $15 and I'll have a 1-gallon carboy when it's over.
You've done the same thing. Yeah.
So I opted for the 1 gallon so I can get the carboy afterwards.
I like the way you think.
Yeah.
I got like 6 of them here in the house, and that's how I got them.
I got mine from Premium Apple Juice at the health food store, but yeah, no, I'll treat my son to a little good old fashioned apple juice, and take the gallon fermenters at the end of it.
Yeah, I've even been known to come home with a gallon jug of wine, pour it in another container, and get started on a mead right away.
Yeah.
But hey, you know, there's something to be said for table. I like a good table wine too. I've got quite a bit of it around the house here, and you know. So, but hey, Carlo Rossi, what the heck, you know? You know, we were talking, you know, bouchées and boiling honey, or cooking down honey, caramelizing honey here a week or a couple of weeks ago, and it might have even been one of the after show discussions that we were having. Well, I finally got around to cooking down some honey, and it was just a small amount, so I don't know whether I really got the full benefit yet or not. Not real keen on the flavor yet. And Jeff and I were talking before the show here. There's that smokiness, richness that comes out of it when you cook it down. To me, that imparts a kind of almost a bitter type flavor to it. I mean, there was a level of sweetness there, but I found a big difference between caramelized sugar and caramelized honey. I really didn't get that sense of caramel out of it. And having never done this, I mean, I just, you know, my best guess was how I've always done caramel in the past with sugar, and that's over a medium low to low flame, and time is what you're looking at. That's why it takes 45 minutes to an hour to cook down a nice caramel. So, I mean, you know, was it the amount, guys? It was in a stainless steel pan, small pan, very small pan. So what gives? What am I looking for here, or did I miss something?
Well, I don't know. The cooking over the stovetop might have been a little harsh. I mean, I'll give you a contrast here. I did about 1.5 pounds of honey in my crock pot this weekend in preparation for brewing up the coffee. And really, even at high, it took me about 3 or 4 hours to get to the consistency I wanted. Just taking it real slow in a crock pot. The last hour and a half, I left the lid off, and that sped things up quite a bit because I realized a lot of the liquid, actually the water vapor was just kind of condensing at the top and dripping back down.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I think low and slow is your best approach, and the slower you can make that happen, the better your results. I think the open flame on your stovetop might also be hurting things. I don't know about honey, but the few times I've tried to make caramel sauce, I wound up with some burning at the bottom, and that may just be poor processing on my part. But the crock pot is a nice, gentle, slow way to make it happen for me. So I'm very sold on that process. I've not gotten to try a pressure cooker yet, but that seems like it would also be a good way to go.
Yeah. Aaron, do you have any experience with cooking down honey like that at all?
Not yet, actually. However, this weekend I'm planning on brewing up the coffee bochet. So I'm definitely interested just to hear both of your experiences, or all three of your experiences with doing this, so I can kind of learn and plan for what my approach will be. As I'm thinking about it, Jeff and I have been comparing some notes on our techniques that we're planning on, and I think I'm going to use a similar technique as what he did, which is to use the crock pot and throw it on there and just go low and slow for an extended period of time.
Yeah. Chris, what's been your experience with cooking down honey like that?
Well, it was very limited, but I did mine in a pressure cooker. Put it in mason jars and do it in a pressure cooker. I think I went somewhere around 90 minutes. If you do that, make sure that you put the trivet in the bottom of your cooker before you put the jars in, otherwise they'll break.
Yeah.
To hold them up off the heat also. And, if I'm going to caramelize honey, I'm going to use the cheap stuff. I'm not going to go and spend a lot of money on an expensive honey to caramelize it. So Costco and things like that, the big box store honey, as long as it's pure 100% honey, I would just go with a good, a bland clover honey.
Yeah.
Now, there's probably going to be someone out there who really has the ability to taste these things that's probably going to disagree with that. They're probably going to say, no, you get what you put in. But, I don't see it that way because I can't tell the difference.
What was the flavor profile like? I mean, what did it taste like?
Well, it tasted like a caramel that was a very rich caramel, and it did have some smokiness to it to some degree. I think maybe doing it in the pressure cooker minimized some of the smoky aspects of it. It didn't lose a lot of moisture. However, it was quite a bit thicker when it was finished, so the caramelization definitely took place. It was on the verge of being black when I took it out, but it did not taste overly burnt.
Yeah.
It's sort of a difficult flavor to describe. It's different than regular caramel that you might be used to, sugar caramel, much richer. So, maybe it was your cook time was too fast, or maybe it might have been a bitter aspect in the honey itself that just sort of got concentrated.
Yeah, I think, looking back on it, I think there were a couple of things. I got to go along with what Jeff was saying. And it was in a small stainless steel pan with a copper-clad bottom, which may have been my mistake because even over a low flame, copper conducts heat really, really good. And I probably should have used a thicker bottom pan. Usually when I make caramel, I've got a really nice frying pan that's got a really thick stainless steel bottom to it, and that's typically what I use. And I don't have any problem caramelizing sugar, be it brown sugar or white sugar, either one of them. But this honey thing, I mean, it came to a boil. I mean, everything looked just like it did when I was, making caramel out of regular sugar. But the flavor, it just wasn't. This may be the difference between sugar and honey too that I'm tasting. So maybe I was preconceived, looking for that caramel flavor, and I got something quite a bit different actually. So.
Yeah, I'd probably bring that cooking time. I don't really see a correlation between the amount of honey that you're caramelizing and the time. I mean, I think it should probably, if it takes 2 or 3 hours with a big batch, it probably should take the same amount of time with a small batch. Like Jeff said, he did only 1.5 pounds, which is, that's not a lot more than what you did. Probably a cup and a little over a cup.
No. I didn't do much more than a cup. It's a very small amount.
Yeah, that's about what Jeff probably did, isn't it? I mean, 1.5 pounds is.
That's a couple of cups.
That's a cup and some change, maybe a cup and a half.
Yeah, so he didn't do a lot more than you did, but he took 3 hours to do it. So.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think probably he cooked it too fast and probably got more burning going on than caramelization.
Yeah, I don't want to do a lot of it to start out. I kind of want to do some test batches of caramelized honey first, just to see what I'm getting into. So I've got a small pressure cooker that I could set a trivet in and do, let's say, a pint jar of honey. I may do that and, just see where it winds up. Yeah, I'd like to do that first and test it and taste it. To see what, because it may not be something that I even want to, get into, but I thought, what the heck? I haven't done one of those yet, and it ought to be next on my list. So, we're going to be talking about a couple of other styles of mead here in a minute, both which I've done so far. And I thought maybe this Bochet thing, or Braggot, or Bochet, right? Bochet is the one with caramelized honey. Maybe that should be next on my list, So, but I think you're right. I think rather than waste a really good honey to start out with, Chris, I think what I will do is wind up. I'll go to Costco. They've got some clover honey, and I've done a lot of reading on the Costco honey, and it's good to go. It's good stuff. It's not been watered down and all of that, and so I may get 5 pounds of that, and do up a batch.
That's exactly what I'm doing. What I used for this batch, just a regular old Costco honey. I figured. It is a True Source verified honey, so it's not the cut with high fructose corn syrup stuff you can get at other retailers. It's not particularly flavorful, but that's not what I was going for here.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're going to change the whole foundation of the flavors anyway once you start cooking it. So. The same thing happens with sugar. I mean, it turns from tasting like one thing into something completely different, when you're done with it. So, certainly eat a teaspoon of sugar. It doesn't taste like any caramel that I've ever had. So, that's probably gonna rise to the top of the list after I get my little test pint done and, just see where. Now I'm wondering. When we're talking amounts, I mean, Chris, you said you did yours in a pressure cooker, but you did how many quarts? Or was it a small batch? Did we lose Chris?
I'm sorry, I lost you for a second. Could you tell me?
Yeah, we were. I was just asking you if I'm before I get involved in doing a full blown batch of mead with caramelized honey. I first want to do this little test batch in my small pressure cooker first. I was just curious, how big a batch did you do?
Gosh, it's been such a long time. I did pint jars.
Pint jars, okay.
And, oh, geez, I think I did maybe 5 pint jars. And I ended up, I didn't use all of it, actually.
But you said 90 minutes on the cook time. So, I mean, I'm going to do 1 pint in my small pressure cooker. Am I still looking at 90 minutes?
Yeah, I don't think it matters as far as how much you do.
Yeah, it should.
It's going to have to spend X amount of minutes at that temperature anyway.
Yeah.
I think I had 5 pint jars, and you want to make sure that you only fill them like 3/4 of the way full with honey. So don't fill them all the way up, and treat it as though it was something you were canning, just the same way you would use a pressure cooker. Make sure the jars are covered with water.
Yeah.
And do it just like you're canning something, and go for 90 minutes. And I mean, of course, you can play around with the time. 90 minutes is what I found to get a dark. It was a dark reddish brown, verging on black, but it was not at all burnt.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
And you and I, we have similar preferences as far as, like coffee and the smoky burnt flavors in coffee and bitterness. So that, if I liked it, you'll probably like it too.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to give it a shot in the pressure cooker and just see where I wind up with. And, I mean, who knows? I won't, but I thought I should start out with a small batch first. And
were you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
You guys hear me?
Oh, yeah.
I think I'm cutting out a little bit. Just if you ask me a question and I don't respond, just bear with me. I think I'm having an interruption in service.
Well, we actually, it may be weather related too down there along the coast. I understand that big storm's about ready to hit the coastline in there, but we lost Aaron, so we're waiting for Aaron to come back. We'll
maybe
keep
an
trying.
invasion going on and we don't know it.
Could be.
We're sitting here talking about booze and the country's being invaded.
Yeah. But anyway, we'll keep on plugging away here as I try to get Aaron back online. Wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about melomels and methaglins here. And, I kind of put the little teaser up on the Facebook page, which I thought was kind of funny. I mean, it's, with melomels, I mean, it's fruit, obviously. But how much fruit? Frozen fruit, chopped fruit, fruit puree, fruit juice, what? Or all of the above. Jeff, I'll throw it over towards your way. How much fruit do you think got to go into a melomel? And go ahead.
You give me an opinion. To give you an opinion here, there's a certain point where if your fermentable sugars are more fruit than honey, I think you're actually making a fruit wine flavored with honey. As long as you're below that threshold, you're fine.
Yeah.
I think to an extent it does depend on the type of fruit. I'm going to reiterate, I'm not terribly experienced with melomels. It's kind of the thing that I'm experimenting with a lot this summer. Trying to broaden my horizons there. Generally, I think, the more the better. I'm generally targeting 3 to 5 pounds per gallon, depending on the fruit. We've got some gorgeous mulberry trees in our backyard that I'm picking from, and I've got almost 3 pounds now, so I think I'm going to try making a morat with those. And they're a pretty flavorful berry, so I think 3 pounds is really all I need. On the other hand, I was talking to Chris about his peach mellow because I've got some nectarines that I'm going to make into one, and I think 5 pounds per gallon is a little bit more apropos there. The thing to look at really is how much water content the fruit has. The more water content you've got in there, the more fruit you're going to need. Put it simple.
Yeah, because the water is going to kind of dilute out the flavors, right?
Well, yeah, and really the more what you're after is not necessarily the fruit itself, it's the sugars and the other good stuff in the fruit. The water is just, kind of going to dilute that and make that much less usable to you. So, I mean, like if you were trying to get a watermelon mead, I can't even contemplate how much watermelon you need to put into there. You might not even need to add water at that point.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would, watermelon mead, I would probably be more inclined to extract the juice from the watermelon and use the juice and not the pulp.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man, the pulp is 90% water anyway, so...
If we could further, I wouldn't put flame on it, but if there were a way to reduce the water content of that juice, I might even consider that with as much water goes into those.
Well, I don't know why. I suppose you could use one of these steam juicers that I've seen. I did a little bit of research on those quite a while back, but and to be honest with you, I don't know that on other fruits like peaches and pears and apricots and that kind of thing, not necessarily watermelon. I don't know if it will even work on a watermelon, but I don't know why you couldn't cook down or reduce juice from a watermelon to concentrate the flavors. I don't know why that wouldn't work.
My only concern would be losing some of those delicate aromatics that you get when you apply heat to things. I mean, it's kind of the same idea as boiling honey. You don't want to lose your flavor compounds trying to make something tasty.
Yeah. Aaron, what about you? We're talking melomels. I know Aaron's having a difficult time staying connected, but we got you here. We're talking melomels. We're talking, how much fruit? I mean, does it matter what kind of fruit? The going, you read out on the internet a lot of these forums out there, and the going rate is anywhere from 3 to 5 pounds per gallon. But I don't know that that's necessarily true with all fruit. Is it possible that you can overdo it with some fruits and, using that formula and not have enough of other fruits using the same formula? I don't know, did we lose Aaron again?
I think he's gone.
Aaron, Earth calling to Aaron. Earth to Aaron.
You guys hear me?
Yeah.
I think it's definitely possible. Can you guys hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Hello?
Yep,
okay.
You're here.
Sorry, I could hear you guys. You guys could not hear me. I am struggling tonight.
Oh.
No, so JD, to answer your question about overdoing it, I would think it would be possible. I think, the end result for what you want to go for with the melomel is probably a nice balance of flavors between what you're getting from the honey and from the fruit as well. Having said that, I haven't really had the experience myself of over fruiting. And just one other comment I would make in terms of a really good resource. I'm actually looking at the book right now. Ken Schramm's The Complete Mead Maker has a chapter on fruit and melomels, and he has a chart in the book where he kind of describes different types of fruits, from some of your stone fruits, apples and pears, peaches and things like that, but then also berries, cherries, blackberries, raspberries, and for each of these fruits, he has it broken out into some suggested guidelines for, if you're going for a mild fruit character, use this many, pounds per 5-gallon batch. If you're going for a medium fruit character, you're going to increase that a little bit. And then lastly, if you want a strong fruit flavor, he has kind of the recommended amount there as well. So, I know that's definitely a book that we've plugged a couple of times, and not only just for that chapter on melomels, it's a fantastic read, and definitely would strongly recommend it for any up-and-coming mead maker. But I think that chart is definitely a great resource, at least to kind of get your ballpark range of where you should be shooting for in terms of the pounds per gallon.
Yeah,
I would definitely second that. I mean, Ken's book is probably like the second best resource for a beginning mead maker after this show, if I do say so myself.
Yes, the Bible.
There you go.
Chris, you and I were talking the other day about peaches. I told you that I kind of wanted to do a peach melomel. I've always been thinking about that, and we had quite a discussion on peaches. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do, and it was funny that came up because just the other day, Jeff emailed, mentioned something about nectarines, which I think a good peach recipe will probably translate well over to nectarines, and so I actually had emailed Jeff a couple of times with my peach recipe, and so it's peach is a difficult one to work with because it has a weird acidity. And when I say weird, for anyone listening, if you've ever had a knee-high soda, a peach-flavored knee-high soda, you've experienced that weird acidity. And too much, too little, a little bit too much sweetness, a little too little sweetness, and it throws everything off. And then you add in the fact that peach is a hard, difficult flavor to capture in a fermented drink anyway. So it's peach is a little bit more of a challenge than some, but oh gosh, if you want to talk melomels, I could go on for days about melomels because that's the majority of what I do.
Yeah.
And, I could completely nerd on you and probably put everybody to sleep.
Well, that's the whole point of talking about melomels. I mean, I was talking to you the other day, and I mentioned the fact that I've been thinking about these fruit. Untie my tongue. Fruit purees that are out there. Vintner's Harvest is the brand that I think everybody's familiar with. And I've heard cons about using it, and I've heard plus things about using it. One of the biggest cons is having to put up with the large amount of sediment. When you go to rack, especially when you're doing, a large batch, you're going to wind up with a very large amount of sediment at the bottom. But beyond that, using fruit purees versus using the real deal, is there any difference? Is one always better than the other, or have you guys ever heard of any kind of, any difference in the two?
Well, to me, the biggest difference is always going to be when you go and pick your own, regardless of whether it was some you grew or whether you're pick your own orchard or even at a farmer's market. You've got a lot more control over the quality and ripeness of what you're going to be getting. But with that said, the Vintner's Harvest have always given me good results. I don't have extensive experience using them, but I have used them enough to be able to say that I think they are good quality for home wine and mead making.
Yeah.
Those fruits are picked and canned with home brewing in mind, and then they do a good job.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, guys, and I don't know about. Jeff and Aaron live. You two live in pretty much an agricultural area, right?
Well, more or less. You get about a half hour out of the city, and there's fields, there's orchards, there's agriculture.
Yeah.
Same here. I actually am about maybe 20 or 30 minutes north of Milwaukee, and up here. You're far enough away from the city that there's farms, and go pick your own apple orchards and raspberries and all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, where I live, basically in the middle of L.A., I'm 12 miles from being downtown Los Angeles, right in the heart of things. And there is a U-pick orchard out east of me, about an hour and some change drive. But I noticed the one time that I did go out there that the prices were just almost criminal. I can get the same exact brand of apple juice in the store for probably half the cost that they sell it at the orchard, and I just thought that was absolutely criminal. The very stores that they distribute to sell it for half the cost that you can pick it up at at their own orchard. That being said, it's just apples. If I want anything other, I got to go several hundred miles north to find anything. So I'm relegated to what's available to me in my immediate area. That means going downtown LA to the produce market, to the wholesale produce, place down in LA, and you're buying the same box of fruit that winds up on the shelf in the store. So now you're looking at peaches that are, as hard as baseballs, and other fruits that just aren't even, bananas that are as green as they were the day they were cut off the vine, off the tree. Stuff that is far from being ripe. And to me, and everything I've read about melomels, the ripest fruit is going to give you the best results. Don't you think?
100%.
Yeah, so that's...
Well, I was just going to say to kind of circle back to Chris's point from earlier, and maybe to provide some of my experience comparing very ripe, right off the vine fruit to those vintner's harvest fruit purees. So I think I've done 3 batches of melomels. I've done a peach, a cherry, a sweet cherry, and then a tart raspberry. And the peach and cherries were both using the Vintner's Harvest purees, and then the tart raspberry was at one of these pick-your-own type farms where you go and literally, you guys, these raspberries were just ripe, sun-ripened on the vine, some of the most delicious berries I've ever had. So it's almost like not even fair comparing something out of a can to something that you're just picking out that's just grown from, sunshine and rain. And to me, it just from these 3 batches, I think that the vine ripened fresh raspberry just knocks the socks off of the other 2 batches. Now, part of that could also be, I think the other 2 batches I got a little bit carried away with back sweetening on them. They're definitely quite cloyingly sweet, so that may be interfering a little bit with how much I enjoy those batches as well. But that raspberry batch is just on a different level in terms of the fruit character that I'm getting.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say something. You asked Jeff and Aaron about amounts of fruit. Really, when you talk about melomels, you really have to break this down into categories. The kind of fruit you're using, of course, makes a big difference. But you really have to start, and you have to sort of get organized when you start planning a melomel, because there are so many variables. First of all, we've got to determine what we're going to make. Are you making a light session mead that's going to be light, refreshing, and carbonated? Are you making a wine strength mead? Or are you making a sack mead? Is it going to be dry? Is it going to be a dessert sweet? Somewhere in the middle? All of these things are going to play into how much fruit you use, and what your residual sugar is going to be when you finish. For example, I have a recipe that I make. It's a multi-berry session mead. It's carbonated. It's light. It's refreshing. And the 5-gallon batch has only got 8 pounds of fruit total in it.
Wow.
But on the other hand, if you look at my heart murmur that I did, we're looking at upwards of 7 pounds of fruit per gallon in that thing.
Yeah.
So big, huge difference. There's almost as much fruit in 1 gallon of that as there is in a 5-gallon batch of the other one.
Right.
So then once you determine what you're going to make, then you've got to look at the fruit you're using. Is it a high acidity fruit? What kind of acid does that fruit contain? Is it predominantly a malic acid fruit like tart cherries or apples? Is it a primarily citric acid fruit? And what kind of yeast are you using? 71B will metabolize a certain amount of malic acid, which makes it perfect for softening the acidity of tart cherries. It won't do much of anything for citric acid. So amounts don't really translate from one fruit to the other. You have to take everything into account. You have to take it on an individual basis, and you have to ask yourself a lot of questions about what is this yeast going to do, what's going to happen during the fermentation, and where do I want this thing to end up. And all of those things together will give you the answer as to how much fruit do I need.
Yeah.
So it's a very complicated. We could spend 6 or 7 shows or more talking about nothing but melomels. So it can get nerdy real quick when I start talking about these things, and so I'm going to back up.
The nerdy part, there's a benefit to that, Chris, because, here again, all most of us ever know about making mead is what we read out there on the internet. And I've said it before. There's literally thousands of recipes out there that only tell you part of the story. They don't tell you, they wine yeast. Well, that's all fine and good. Which wine yeast? Because some wine yeasts are better than others when it comes to certain types of mead. And how many pounds of fruit are you using? How many, what's the hydrometer readings? What gravity? They tell you use 3 pounds of peach, 2.5 pounds of honey. Well, that's all fine and good, but what's the what are the numbers? What's the hydrometer reading? What kind of acidity are we looking at? What kind of a wine yeast are you using? These are all the things that they don't tell you, and we sit here and start working on. I'd like to do a peach melomel. Okay, so where do I begin? And I think Chris has hit on something. It depends on how strong do you want it to be? All the different things involved that Chris was saying. So I think it's cool to be nerdy about it.
Yeah, well,
I'll say this too. Melomels, I think, are probably the most made meads out there. Okay, everything that I have read and seen, and I've done a lot of research and reading virtually every forum out there, and Melomels is by far the number one mead that everybody makes, whether it's peaches or whatever kind of fruit.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think there's two reasons for that. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Jeff, but there's two reasons I think that is. Number one, I think that people believe if they put a lot of fruit in, they can get by with using a cheap honey. And that's simply not true. Your honey selection in a melomel is just as important as it is in a traditional. And the second reason, I think, is because there's a lot more wine drinkers than mead drinkers. And I think maybe melomels would help to appeal to wine drinkers more so than just giving them a straight traditional mead. So that may be the reason behind that.
Yeah.
Well, I'd corroborate with that. I mean, for one, I think a lot of mead makers look at fruit and go, well, if I put enough fruit in there, or I put some interesting fruit in there, it can cover some of the shortcomings of my process. I think it's also, we see a lot more melomels online because people like to be kind of bragging about their flavor combinations or their ingenuity there, and it's really kind of hard to brag about making a traditional. You don't get the same kind of oh, that's really interesting or that's really cool when you just say, oh no, I used 5 pounds of meadowfoam honey and got a really nice semi-sweet mead out of this. It lacks the kind of imagination that you get with I did dark cherries and peaches or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think I also belong to a couple of winemaking forums as well, because we make a lot of wine here at the house. And one of the things that I've been looking at are these so-called country wines. And I don't know that I really want to get too involved in it, because basically they're nothing more than sugar wines. And it's the same as making mead. Well, in place of using honey, you're just using sugar. Chris has mentioned it before. If you want to taste some flavor combinations, try making a sugar wine to start out with, and and do it that way. And the same for these country wines that it just runs the gamut. Just like melomels, and melomels to the mead making is country wine to the wine making. It's the same deal. They just replace the honey with the sugar, and you have what they call country wine. And even those recipes, they're not as complete as they probably could be. And I think that's where maybe sometimes people get in trouble, because, and I think Chris has really hit on something. I think you got to spend some time and really investigate. I mean, what kind of yeast are you going to use? And I know there's not a whole lot of information out there about what yeast works well with what yet, as far as mead making goes. A lot of it out there that we try to guess at. Looking at the winemaking industry, we think this yeast will go good with this honey. We found that 71B is a pretty good all-around for just about anything. So the bits and pieces of what we've discovered is coming to light. But I don't know that there's enough out there to really nail down, use this kind of yeast with this fruit and this honey, and use that kind of yeast with that kind of fruit and that honey. You know, not like it is in the wine industry where they have specific yeast strains to use with specific grape juices. And I think that's the big component that's missing in the mead industry so far, you know.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I believe even different wineries may use different strains of yeast with making the same kinds of wine.
Oh, sure.
So, you know, you may get a cab from 2 or 3 different wineries, and they all use different kinds of yeast. Man, this is just one of those things where, you know, you can listen to us, you can read, and you can investigate, but really when it comes down to it, there's nothing that will replace your experience.
Yeah.
And, you know, we can pass along what we know, and it's good information, but that does not necessarily mean that we like the same kind of mead that you do. So if you have a totally different taste preference, even though our information is good, solid information, that doesn't mean it's going to suit your taste.
Yeah.
So how do you fix that? Well, you get in there and you find a starting point and you start experimenting until you find what you like. Because it only takes one batch. If you take good notes and you know exactly what you did, it only takes one batch to say, this is way too much fruit for my taste, or this is not near enough fruit for my taste.
Yeah.
And you already have a head start on where you need to go from there. So get some experience on your own to suit your taste.
Yeah. And this is where those Carlo Rossi jugs come into play with small batches and experimenting first, right?
That's crazy. Just like
definitely.
Let's talk methaglens here for a minute, guys. I'm making, not Jeff. Am I making my first methaglen? Is that what this hibiscus would be classified under?
Well, there are 2 schools of thought as to what defines a methaglen and what defines a melomel. And my train of thought is if you've got herbs and spices in it, then it's a methaglen. If you've got fruit in it, then it's a melomel. There are some that say if whatever herb or spice you're adding to the to mead is adding a source of fermentable sugars, then it's still a melomel. So I don't know if you took a significant gravity reading off of that tea before you started adding honey to it.
No.
But when I made my chamomile mead last year, I did that around the same time as a traditional that I was going to flavor in secondary later, and using exactly the same amount of honey. There was a spike in the significant gravity in the order of like 0.01, maybe at tops. But there was definitely some residual sugar from those flowers. So yeah, that's a sticky definition.
Well, by virtue of the traditional description of a methaglen, this hibiscus thing that I got going, which is basically your recipe, and it has the sumac in it. I don't know, sumac, is that classified as an herb?
I would say so. I mean, I forget exactly what part of the plant that comes from, but it is a powdered part of a plant.
Yeah. And
realistically, that's probably adding the least amount of fermentable sugars of any of the ingredients in there. So, that's definitely an herbal ingredient for sure.
Well, so let's talk about some ingredients that you can use. Does it run the full list of herbs and spices?
Oh, I would think so. I mean, really, you've got a lot of options as far as herbs and spices, and the nature of those herbs and spices are going to determine when you want to add them or how you want to add them. I mean, I talk about like a tea approach for the hibiscus and the chamomile, and that has worked out wondrously for me. But there are some herbs and spices, things like cloves or cinnamon or things that are more, I would say, like roots and bark parts of plants.
Yeah.
That I think realistically you want to put in secondary and kind of dial in the flavor. Especially things like star anise or really, really flavorful stuff. You want to use just a little bit at a time and really dial that in rather than, putting it in primary and letting it go full bore.
Yeah. Well, and even with spices, I don't have a lot of experience with spices other than that pumpkin fiasco that I had here a while back. And I'm not even so sure that adding spices up front is even the way to go. I think I would probably even treat spices as one of those additions that you would put in secondary, much dropping an oak stave or oak cubes, in during secondary. And, from there on out, it's kind of a taste test to determine at what point you need to pull them out, based on your profile, your flavor that you're trying to arrive at. So,
yep, that's definitely one of the major and the safest approaches to it. Another very safe approach to it is actually to make what's referred to as a tincture, where basically you put an amount of spices into a bell jar with either some grain alcohol or some vodka. I would suggest vodka because grain alcohol is harsh as hell. And you kind of just let that sit for 2 to 4 weeks and let the alcohol extract all that flavor. And then you just very slowly dial in and add some of that flavored liquor into your mead when it's pretty close to being done. And that gets you the flavor you're looking for. Now, I will preface this by saying that seems like cheating to me.
It is cheating. When you eliminate the possibility of failure, you take all the fun away.
Well said.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's out there. I mean, who would have thought that dropping a basil leaf into, a bunch of honey and water would produce any decent kind of results? I'll tell you what I have done in the past, when it comes to herbs, that I've dropped a sprig of rosemary into a Chardonnay, an unoaked Chardonnay, and came out with some pretty outstanding results. So that's my first encounter with herbs and alcohol. So this whole mead thing,
herbs and fruit play nicely together too. They're one of the big changes in the categories between the category standards between a lot of the contests this year and last year is that now that there's a new category that is exclusively fruit and spice. Whereas before it was, methaglins and melomels, and if you were doing both, it was kind of an experimental. And there are plenty of fruits and spices that play really well together, like cinnamon in your apple cider, or I hear basil and strawberries go very well together. I could see that turning into a pretty good mead if you could get the strawberries right. Mm-hmm. There are endless combinations, and I think it was really appropriate of them to make this new category of fruit and spice because, you can get some really good stuff that way.
Well, now we can enter our JAOs.
What's that, Chris?
I said, now we can enter our JAOs.
Yeah. In the cooking world, I mean, savory and sweet go together pretty much hand in hand. I mean, I've, a nice pork roast bathed in a nice sweet balsamic vinegar that's laced with, some fresh thyme and rosemary, while it bakes. I mean, that goes pretty well together. So, I mean, sweet and savory, the sweetness coming from the honey, savory coming from fresh herbs. And there again, I mean, fresh herbs, dried herbs, do you think there's a preference out there over one or the other? Or does it?
I always go for the freshest I can get when I'm doing a method blend. That is not to say that dried is necessarily bad. I mean, obviously, in the case of the hibiscus and the chamomile, you and I have both used the dried stuff, and it came out fantastic smelling.
Oh yeah.
It really just depends on the easiest way you can get really good fresh stuff. So if you're doing something that comes from a green herb, then I would absolutely say, yeah, if you can pick that yourself, then you're in hog heaven.
You know what? You know what comes to mind immediately? Basil and tomatoes.
Yeah.
You know,
if anybody needs any basil, we're overrun with it.
Oh yeah.
I had no clue how much basil plants produce, but my wife wanted to plant some this year, and I think we've got 5 basil plants, and it's getting picked every day. And we don't know what else to do with it. I mean, my gosh, you can only eat so much basil.
Yeah.
And, I was actually online looking for recipes to make aftershave lotion. Because we're trying to find ways to use basil.
Yeah, a man can only have so much pesto in his life, right?
I was going to say, Chris, I'll have to get you my wife's pesto recipe. We same thing as you. We just put a bunch of basil plants in the ground, and the recipe she uses, it definitely consumes a lot of basil. So,
oh yeah,
well, we need some way to consume it, because it's these things are absolutely. I mean, we're getting probably 2 cups of leaves every day.
That's about one little batch of pesto right there. So I'll tell you what, you start making some fresh pesto at home, put it in a jar, and mail it to me.
Yeah. I found a recipe for bay rum that uses some basil in it, so I may get into the aftershave business.
Yeah, there's actually quite a few cocktails out there that use basil in it, but and I love basil in cooking. I mean, it's an all-around herb that you can pretty much use with a lot of things.
Totally, but that's another one, JD. To your point from earlier, the flavor of basil changes so drastically from fresh to dried.
Yes, absolutely, it does. I've used dried. I started out using dried basil in my tomato sauces, and then I switched to fresh basil, and there's a world of difference.
Yep.
The fresh basil is so much sweeter and so much more pungent, and it just tastes so much better. I really don't know what dry basil even contributes, to be honest with you, but I'm thinking the same thing would be true in meads too, with dried. I mean, I always try to use fresh, so I can't imagine that dried would produce anything good, to be honest with you, in a mead. So,
well, and I think if you're not trying to make strictly a basil mead or a rosemary mead, you're just trying to add a little bit of flavor or a little bit of interest to your mead. Almost anybody can put together a little window box with some herbs in it, and a few sprigs is probably really all you need for even at least a small batch.
Yeah. It doesn't say. I mean, I put, and it was only in the bottle for maybe 2 days. I put a small sprig of rosemary in that wine bottle and corked it back up. It was in there for a couple of days, and then I got the little sprig out, but the wine had a fantastic rosemary flavor to it. But and let's talk spices. Same kind of deal. I mean, whole spices better than the ground spices. Or are we looking at apples and oranges when we're talking herbs versus spices?
It's tough to say. I would definitely go for whole spices when I can, just because it's my general understanding that you hold on to a lot more of the flavor oils and things like that. They tend to decompose faster. I'm sorry, when they decompose faster when they're like crushed up or ground up. So for my process, if I were going to add spices to a mead, generally my approach would be to get the whole stuff and then just do a really rough crush on them before I added them into secondary.
Yeah. And I think there are some spices out there that, where a little bit is too much. Clove comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
Easy to overdo it.
Yes, very easy.
Something else to keep in mind when you're choosing fresh or dry is that there's a lot of herbs and spices that actually will intensify in flavor when they dry. For example, sage. Sage is one that actually tastes better and more intense when it's dried than it does when it's fresh. So, and I'm sure there's others. I'm not aware of exactly which ones, but I do know sage is one of them.
I'd probably debate you on that, but I'll go along with that. I've used fresh sage. I prefer fresh sage over dried sage any day when I'm cooking with it. But the mead making thing, that's a whole new ball game. So I don't know that. I don't know that dried sage wouldn't work in a mead. When it comes to spices, even nutmeg is another one that imparts a little bit goes a long, long way.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, taking a whole nutmeg pod and crushing it up and throwing it in a batch of mead, that might be a little too much too.
And reverting back to the nerdy side of things, also you need to find out these flavor compounds that are in here. Are they water soluble or are they alcohol soluble?
Yeah.
So that has a lot to do with it also.
Well,
Chris,
yeah.
would that kind of dictate whether or not you would introduce them in primary or secondary?
Yeah, it probably would. Now, for me, I don't make a lot of methadons. The melomels, yes, that's my thing, but I don't make a lot of methadons. But for me, with the ones I do make, spices and herbs they go in secondary automatically. That's where I control how they infuse. And I think probably the only exception to that is my ginger mead that I make. And that ginger goes in right up front. And, but aside from the ginger, I think any spice or herb, I always use it in secondary. The vanilla mead that we posted on the website for the beginners, that's actually considered a methadone. Vanilla would fit in that category, and it goes in secondary. So I would have to look up. I would have to do some research on this because honestly, I'm not up to speed on it like I should be. But I believe that most of those flavor compounds in things like chilies and spices and things, I think they're just about all going to be more alcohol soluble. And because of that, you're going to be able to extract the flavor you want in secondary, and you're also going to be able to control it. Because if you put these spices and herbs in a mesh bag and you drop them into secondary, you can take them out. You can go in there and you can taste that thing twice a day or once a day or whatever you want to do.
Yeah. And
when it gets just right, yank it out. And it's very easy to control that way.
I've done that with my ciders. I've actually dropped up to 5 cinnamon sticks into a cider batch right up front, and it did absolutely nothing on the finished product. I had to actually drop more cinnamon sticks into secondary in order to get that cinnamon flavor that I was looking for. So I think I think doing things like herbs and spices. I think your best bet is to reserve that for secondary. 'Cause I got to go along with Chris. You're able to control the flavor more because if you drop them down into primary, I mean, what's there is there. You put it in, you can't take it back.
Right.
Whereas,
and remember the action of your yeast also. I'll give you a perfect example. One that I know quite well is the vanilla. There's a lot of the flavor compound of vanilla can be metabolized and broken down by a certain yeast. So if you put your vanilla bean, you might make a 5-gallon batch and load it up with 5 or 6 vanilla beans in primary. And when you get finished, you have absolutely no vanilla flavor at all.
Right.
Because there's a component there that can be metabolized. So that almost dictates that it has to go in secondary.
That's how I did my vanilla beans, my vanilla mead that I bottled here just recently. There was 8 vanilla beans that went into secondary for, probably 6 months, 4 months, maybe 4 to 6 months, I think. I'll have to go back and look, but the amount of vanilla, I mean, you'd think 8 vanilla beans would impart a lot of flavor. It really doesn't. And these were whole split vanilla beans, Indonesian beans. I mean, the vanilla is definitely there, but it's not nearly as pronounced as you think it might be from that much vanilla. But I don't think it would have done anything. And my intent was to do it in secondary, but I still believe that it wouldn't have done anything in primary. So, we're getting kind of late in the hour here, guys. Good discussion. I mean, this is something that we could probably go on with, I'm sure, and we'll bring it up again on future shows. Melomels and metheglins, certainly 2 of the most popular mead styles out there, I believe. And the experimental, the other wonderful thing about making mead is being able to experiment. I brought that tomato basil thing up because I remember my grandmother making tomato jam, and she would always put basil in it. I don't know anybody else that has ever put basil in their tomato jam, but oh my God, I'm going back and remembering the flavors of this tomato jam that my grandmother used to make was just amazing. So I'm trying to picture that in a mead. I think would be an amazing flavor, but I guess the next question would be, well, can you ferment tomatoes? So, but with that,
hey, JD, before we get any further along, I said I was drinking the cheapo wine this week.
Yeah.
By the next show next week, Jeff and Aaron should have their coffee mead going. You and I have got ours going. And by next Tuesday, we should be drinking some really good mead because we're waiting on a delivery.
Absolutely.
And we need to give a big shout out to Sergio Matella over at Melovino Meadery because he's chimed in on the coffee thing, and he's going to let us sample his coffee mead along with some others. So I'm really looking forward to that. And Sergio, if you're listening, man, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Sergio Matella, Melovino Meadery. We don't do any plugs here on the show, but hey, throw a shout out to the boys out there in New Jersey. Sergio does make some pretty cool meads, I guarantee you. I've had some of his, but looking forward to it, and echo what Chris says. Thanks a million, Sergio. The coffee mead quick update, really not a whole lot to tell here. Like Chris said, he and I, we've got our batches started. He's a day behind. Not that that's going to make a hill of beans when we get down to the wire. Mine's perking away. Actually, it was perking away just fine. It's slowed way down now. We're 6 days into it, so it's about that time. 71B took off like a champ, Chris. Almost like a volcano does. It just churns away. 2 grams of nutrients. I did the 24, 48, 72, day 7 type thing. I cheated. Today was the last day for the last nutrient feeding. But it's looking good. It smells good. I haven't tasted it yet, but this is a thing that takes time. So.
Well, that's interesting because mine's fairly sluggish and has been from the start.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Much slower than normal. So,
what temperature are you fermenting at?
I'm about 66.
Mine was at. Mine was about. Mine was actually a couple degrees higher. Mine was probably 68 degrees, at least 68 degrees. So, a couple degrees. I don't know how that would, if that would have a big impact, but my experience with
comparing to other meads that I ferment at that temperature, and this one's a little bit slower. It's not terribly slower, but I noticed it was a little bit sluggish, and I sort of chalked it up to maybe the caffeine. I don't know. We'll see, but it's coming along. It's not in any danger of stalling or anything. So
just churning away here at it. And then Aaron and Jeff, they're about to get theirs started. They're doing theirs just a little bit differently. Actually, not a little, quite a lot differently. And I'd be curious to, when we get them all done, pass them around and taste them all and, see where we wind up. We didn't do it last week, but I thought we'd take a quick run through the hopper list, guys. Let's start off with Aaron. What do you got in the hopper, bud? Coming in, going out?
Absolutely. Well, I think the one thing I'll highlight from the hopper here, since this was the Methlogen episode, and I think this technically qualifies as a Methlogen, is in primary right now I've got 3 1-gallon experimental batches going where I'm testing out 3 different hop varieties in just a fairly lower gravity session style mead. So the 3 hops that I've got going here, one is kind of a piney, resiny type of a hop, Chinook. The second is going to be more of like a fruity, citrusy type of a hop, the Calypso hop. And then lastly, I've got crystal hops, which are more of like it's described as a pungently floral hop. So definitely excited to see what type of different character I get from these different hop varieties, and they've been kind of churning away here with Cephal US-05 yeast and basswood honey for the last maybe 8 days or so, 8 or 9 days. So they're just about conking out here.
Yeah, cool. Jeff, what's in the hopper, bud? Hello, Jeff. Take your mute button off, Jeff.
Sorry, guys. So the experimental meats are they're getting bottled up right now. I've got a tasting Saturday, so I'll get some nice objective views on what came out better and what came out worse from that. Then let's see. I've still got the session mead that I made with hops, and I just way over hopped that. So once I get some of these 1 gallons freed up again, I'm going to put together just a traditional session mead to kind of cut that with, and hopefully save that batch.
How much hops? How many hops did you use? How many ounces, pounds, or gallons?
I used one whole ounce of hops in a 1 gallon batch.
Wow, 1 ounce. That's it.
Yep. Well, 1 ounce sounds like a small amount, but it's a good. It translates to about half to 3/4 of a cup of pellets. So, yeah, it's a pretty substantial amount.
Wow, I've seen beer recipes where they don't even put that much in.
Yeah, I wound up going with a half an ounce for each of mine, and Jeff, I had used your guidance of boiling for about 10 minutes, and boy, is that a pungent smell. My wife came home just right around the end of it, and she walks in and she goes, "Man, it stinks in here."
Oh, that's a way to keep the neighbors out of your hair too, isn't it?
Yeah. Crack a window and they won't come bugging you for at least a couple of days.
Chris, what's in the hopper? Oh, go ahead, Jeff. I thought you were done.
Yeah, in secondary, I've got that Cherimoya mead. It is actually crystal clear now. It has cleared really, really quickly. It still tastes like butane. It is nasty. But I'm hoping some time will clear that up and kind of help age that out. We'll that one's a wait and see. And then on deck, of course, I've got the coffee mead. I've got the traditional I already mentioned, and then looking at doing I'm looking at doing a big batch of that the multivary session mead that Chris sent us a while back. Just something nice and fruity to have for the summer months here.
Oh yeah, and keep up with your hopper list every so often. If you have any changes or whatever, send them to me. We're kind of running a running tally on the website, themeadhouse.com. We put everybody's hopper list up there, so you can see what we're doing. And if you have any questions on any of them, feel free to contact us through the website there. Just go to the Contact Us page up there, and it'll shoot me an email, and we'll certainly get back to you. Chris, what besides your coffee thing, what do you got in the hopper?
Well, I've got my second coffee thing that I did on the side. It's an experiment using a different cold brew technique, sort of a hybrid hot brew, cold brew.
Yeah.
Finally got the Thai curry off the coconut and waiting for that to clear up. But this chocolate orange that I've been talking about, looking like showing promise finally. I think we got something there.
Oh yeah.
And if you're thinking about using any chocolate, go with the Dutch process. So yeah, I think that's going to be looking promising here in the near future. Going to be starting the chocolate strawberry along with that pretty soon, as well as a few other of what I call my standard meads that I always try to keep on hand that I happen to be all out of right now. So I'm going to be starting up one of my cherry mells pretty soon. Going to do a raspberry that it takes a while to age. And then I got to do another batch of ginger as well. So I got all those coming up. But Jeff, you said you were going to do my multi-berry session mead. Did you get a carb a kegging set up?
No, I didn't. I've just got a bucket that I'm going to be using, and I might try. Sorry about that. There's a fire engine running past my house.
Not coming to your house, I hope.
Oh no. No, I just got a brewing bucket, and I might try bottle conditioning this later. I'm not exactly sure how I want to take that. I might also just use this as an excuse to pop for the kegging system here that I've been kind of thinking about for quite a while. So we'll wait and see.
To do that one correctly, you're going to need the kegging system because you need to stabilize that and back sweeten it with. Oh, geez, I'd have to look at my recipe. It's either 3 or 5 pounds, I think it was, of honey. So you want to stabilize it, back sweeten it, and then carb it up to 3 volumes in your keg. Mm-hmm. So you're going to need that to do that by the recipe.
Are you force carbonating, Chris?
Yeah, you force carb it, and it gets you a corny keg. You can get the whole setup very cheaply. It's not expensive to force carb. And if you have a bottling, like a Coca-Cola or Pepsi or anything like that around, they can probably refill your tanks. They can sell you the nitrogen or CO2, whichever you prefer. And it's very cheap. I mean, a good carving system is not that expensive. Now, if you want to get into serving on tap, you can start spending a lot more money. But if you're just looking to force carb and serve right out of the corny keg, or for that matter, you can even buy a Blickman beer gun and you can bottle it after it's carbonated.
Yeah.
It's really not that expensive, and it's well worth it if you plan on doing any carb at all, because if you're relying on bottle conditioning, then you're always going to be stuck having to have dry beverages. Whereas with this multi-berry, it's meant to have some sweetness to it when you can't bottle carb that. So,
Right.
Yeah, get you a good kegging system, because they're cheap. I mean, they really are. If you go down to like a Coca-Cola bottling works or something like that, you may even be able to buy a corny keg off of them, along with a nitrogen tank, and then all you got to do is buy your regulator. So it's a cheap way to do it.
Yeah. That sounds like an addition that needs to come into the Mead House brewing room here at my place. But that's after I get my 14-gallon stainless steel fermenter.
Good God.
Well, I mean, this goes back to the melomels, Chris, and I mean, you and I talked about it too. I mean, the only reason it's still going to be a 5-gallon batch, but the big lesson I found out with the pumpkin experiment was the fact that 27 pounds of product displaces a hell of a lot of liquid in a 7-gallon fermenter. So, yeah. So I mean, that's my whole thing. I mean, if I wanted to do, let's say I wanted to do that peach, a 5-gallon peach. I mean, I'm looking at 30 pounds of peaches, and that's going to displace a whole lot of liquid all in one whack. So that 14.
Yeah, reminded me. I forgot to mention to Jeff in the email, if you do plan on doing that nectarine and you're going with the 5 pounds, you're probably going to want to go get you a food grade trash can. I got my tongue wrapped around my eye tooth and I couldn't see what I was saying. You're probably going to want to see a trash can, because you're not going to find a fermentation bucket that's going to hold it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my plan was actually to do. I was actually planning on just working on essentially splitting it down to where when I age it into secondary, I've got 2 to 3 gallons finished product that are going into the little 1-gallon fermenters, rather than trying to do a big 5-gallon batch. Just again because of space constraints.
Yeah. I guarantee you this fermenting stuff, it takes up quite a bit of room.
Yeah, and if you forget to label something, and you won't know what the hell you got.
Anyway,
these little 1-gallon jugs like we're doing, and you get them all full.
Yep.
Get some good masking tape or something, or good labels, because if you get some cheap masking tape and it dries out and falls off and you lose it, you won't know what the hell you got.
I usually use Avery labels. I just go get a little pack of Avery labels and I write it on there and stick it to the carboy, and done deal. But anyway, what JD's got going here in the fermenter, I've got that sourwood with, I hate to call it a sourwood mesquite, because those are only like 5.5 pounds or so, 6 pounds, not even 6 pounds of mesquite in it. versus the 12 pounds or so of sour wood. So I'm really looking forward to that. And Chris, that D21 that we decided to use, that's like D21 churns away like you wouldn't believe, and it creates a lot of carbon dioxide. So if anybody's out there using D21, that stirring twice a day probably isn't even going to be enough. Maybe 3 times a day. You don't want to get too wild with it, but you do want to keep that CO2 knocked down for sure. And at this stage of the game, I think we're 6-7 days into this one too, or maybe even more. It's still developing a lot of CO2, so I'm still stirring that CO2 out to keep it knocked down. But nicely.
Be real careful about stirring it too often because you'll overshoot your final gravity.
Yeah, well, we're still at about 1070, so 30 if I'm not mistaken. But it's still floating right around 1070 now. So I thought that was a little bit slow, for the length of time that it's been fermenting. But it's also fermenting at 60. Let me turn around and look. 68 degrees, which is maybe kind of on the cool side. And that, of course, is by design too. So. It's still chugging away there. Looking forward to that one. The coffee mead, of course, I've actually got a couple of those going. I did put the other Tanzania into a 1-gallon bucket and started working on that. Same process, same honey, same yeast, same everything. Just wanted to see what that's going to turn out like. The Kenya is the main one. That's the one that we decided on. That's coming along just fine. The hibiscus chamomile deal, this is Jeff's recipe. Changed it up just a bit, added in place of the, and I actually wound up with 2 gallons of mead, and I changed it up a little bit. Rather than use, I believe, Jeff, you used the wildflower honey, if I'm not mistaken. No, Jeff's probably still on mute again, but
sorry, yeah, that's correct. I use a wildflower.
Yeah, I changed it up a little bit and stuck blackberry honey in it, and I thought it might be a unique change. So that one is coming along very well. It's got incredible flavor, even at this stage of the game. I've got a hard cider that I threw together. It's just plain old apple juice, unadulterated, unmolested apple juice, with a pound of brown sugar. This is a small batch, just a 1-gallon batch. A pound of brown sugar, and I think it was 2.5. I don't know, maybe 2 pounds of wildflower honey. And I don't even think it was a pound of brown sugar, to be honest with you. Maybe a half a pound. It was enough to take the gravity up to about 1 point. I think it was 1 point. I think that one was 1.1302. It's going to be on the sweeter side of things. I still have the wildflower mesquite aging. The Shiraz was racked over to a carboy and that's sitting in a carboy. That one was put together with some blueberries, about a pound of blueberries. So. And that'll be finishing off here in the next month or so in the carboy. The Orange Blossom Traditional still sitting over there in the corner in the carboy. Still needs to come down. I don't know if the tardiness is ever going to come away in it, but I'm just going to leave it sit for a while. The Mesquite Traditional starting to come along pretty good. That one was actually done with 58W3 yeast. Kind of an oddball out there that you don't hear of very often. It's got kind of a peppery, I think it'll come out quite nice. Other than that cherry pomegranate thing, Chris, that you and I talked about months ago, it's starting to come around finally. It's not quite as tart as it was after fermentation. So I think I might be pleased with that one. So.
Yeah, it'll come around. Tart cherry makes a good melomel when it's done right.
Yeah, it definitely has.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it definitely has a very nice cherry flavor. The cherry is very pronounced. I don't know that the pomegranate added anything other than tartness, but it definitely has a cherry flavor. So,
yeah. And that 58W3 yeast that you mentioned, I use that in the Thai curry mead because of that peppery quality that it gives. So you and I both have one going with that. That's my first time using it, actually.
Yeah. Now that mead with the 58W3 was actually started last November. So it's still sitting in a 3-gallon carboy aging. It hasn't cleared much at all, which is a little surprising. Not quite sure why. Everything tastes good. I mean, it's fine. So I may have to put a clearing agent in it, and because it's definitely not going to do it naturally on its own accord. But I'm also thinking of, here we go with the spices, and I don't want to run this show on any longer than we need to, but I was actually thinking, because it's got this nice peppery little taste to it, I was actually thinking of dropping some peppercorns down in it. And if you really sit back and think about pepper has this sweetness to it that's kind of nice too. But I'm going to have to think about that for a while.
Yeah, I have some experience with black peppercorns in a mead, and it didn't turn out well.
Didn't turn out well?
Not for me, not for my taste. I've heard some other people who did that, and they used, let's see, what was it? Telecherry peppercorns.
Oh.
And they really liked the results. I didn't care for it so much, but I will say the one thing that I did do with a what would qualify as a peppercorn was with something called long peppers. If you're familiar with long peppers, they look like a miniature pine cone almost. And those things are very, very interesting in a mead.
Oh.
Yeah, if you can get a hold of some long peppers, make a tincture out of them or something, taste them and see what you think. I'd like to get everybody's opinion on that, because I think there's some really interesting things to be done with those in mead. I just haven't quite figured it out yet.
Long peppers, common spelling, long peppers, right?
Long peppers. They look like a miniature pine cone almost.
Okay.
They're probably half-inch long, maybe. They're sort of a brown color, and it's a commonly used spice in some cooking. But you can get them from Penzies or anywhere like that. Look them up, order an ounce or so of them, and give me your opinion on them, because I want to know what you think.
Yeah,
if you don't want to do that, I'll send you some. And they're very interesting. I think there's promise there.
Yeah.
Well, and I've also heard some promising results have come from using, instead of black peppercorns, pink peppercorns. Although I've never tried that myself. It's kind of one of those things that's in the back of my mind as far as something to try.
Pink peppercorns.
Yeah, we've all got so many things like that. We're going to be busy for the next 10 years trying all this.
One of the things, we may have, if we're all going to stick around for a few minutes during the after show here, something we need to start thinking about is putting together another recipe. So we can toss that around during the after show here in just a few minutes. But with that, I want to thank Angie Colwell again for listening to the show. I hope she found this one as interesting as the one she's already listened to. on the road with her husband. And Christopher, I hope we were of a little bit of help out there. And Randall, Scott Dolan, please be careful of them bottle bombs. And yeah, you ought to use that sulfite if you anticipate any residual sugar hanging around there after your fermentation. But guys, with that, it's time for us to get out of here. And what do you say we come back next week, next Tuesday night? We'll do it all over again. We'll talk about some pochés and braggots next week. So we'll see everybody then.